There's a storm brewing in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. A really dramatic new federal plan is on the table, and it's set to completely change how millions of acres of public forest in Oregon are managed. So, what exactly is this plan, and why is it causing such a huge debate?
The whole thing really boils down to this number: 1 billion board feet. That is the staggering amount of timber the federal government wants to start harvesting from these lands every single year. And just to put that into perspective, that's not a small increase. We're talking about quadrupling recent harvest levels.
But, this isn't just about cutting more trees. It's a full-blown reversal. Driven by some recent executive orders aimed at boosting domestic timber, this proposal is basically trying to rewind the clock, throwing out 30 years of conservation policy to get back to the kind of high-volume logging we saw in the 1960s.
So you might be asking yourself, how is a reversal like this even possible? Well, to really understand this monumental proposal, we need to look at a legal collision course that's actually been building for decades.
You can really boil this entire conflict down to a head-on crash between two powerful federal laws. See, on one side, you've got the 1937 O&C Act. It legally mandates sustained yield timber production to help financially support local counties. But on the other side, you've got the Endangered Species Act from the 1990s, which demands absolute protection for threatened species, like the northern spotted owl, and their habitats. These two mandates are just fundamentally at odds with each other.
So let's go back in time a bit. Let's trace the deep legal and historical roots of this modern-day battle because it'll help us see exactly how we arrived at this standoff.
This timeline really lays it all out. It all kicked off way back in 1937 with that O&C Act, the one that mandated logging for county money. This led to what people called a golden age of logging from the 60s through the 80s, where over 1 billion board feet were being cut every year. But then, bam, the 90s hit. The northern spotted owl was listed as threatened, and that brought logging to a screeching halt. The result? The 1994 Northwest Forest Plan, which created huge conservation reserves and just slashed harvest levels. This new plan for 2026, it wants to undo all of that, putting that original 1937 mandate back on top.
Believe it or not, the entire legal fight really hinges on just two words from that 1937 law: sustained yield. That phrase is the legal key that unlocks this whole thing. For decades, everybody just kind of agreed it meant get as much timber as possible. But the big question today is, does it have to mean that? Or can it be balanced with more modern ideas about conservation?
Now, this push to log more isn't just coming out of nowhere. There are some really powerful economic arguments driving all of this, and they're rooted in the financial survival of rural Oregon.
And this right here, this shows you the core of the problem for local communities. When logging was slashed back in the 90s, county revenues just plummeted. The money they got from timber sales went from over $100 million in 1989 to just a tiny fraction of that ever since. That crippled local budgets for everything. We're talking schools, public safety, you name it.
But here's the real game changer. There was a recent change in the FY26 Appropriations bill that created a massive new incentive. Before, counties got 50% of the timber sale money. Now, they're going to get 75%. That is a 50% pay raise overnight, and it creates this enormous financial motivation to support much higher logging volumes.
And look, this isn't just about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. It has real-world impact. As Coos County Commissioner Rod Taylor put it, this extra money means they can start funding essential services again, like literally reopening parts of the local jail. It's a direct lifeline for communities that feel like they've been left behind.
Okay, so that's the economic argument. But there's a whole other side to this coin. Environmental advocates are warning that turning back the clock on logging comes with a staggering ecological price tag.
And the sheer scale of the change they're proposing is just immense. Under the old plan, almost 80% of this land was protected in conservation reserves. The new proposal flips that completely. We're talking about moving roughly 77% of the land, that's almost 2 million acres, into a category where it can be logged, and that includes clearcutting.
So what's actually on that land that would be opened up to logging? Well, conservation groups say it's some of our most valuable natural capital. We're talking about the last of the low-elevation old-growth forests, critical habitat for endangered species like that spotted owl, watersheds that give us clean drinking water, healthy streams for salmon, and these massive carbon sinks that help us fight climate change. And this brings us to what might be the most paradoxical part of the whole debate, the argument that in order to save the forests from fire, we have to log them.
You have two completely opposite arguments here. The pro-logging side says, look, Decades of putting out every fire have created these overgrown tinderboxes that are just waiting to explode. We need to thin them out. But a lot of scientists counter that and say industrial logging actually makes fires worse because it targets the big, fire-resistant trees and replaces them with these dense, super flammable plantations. Okay, let's break down that scientific argument step by step. First, they say industrial logging takes out the biggest, most fire-resistant trees. This opens up the forest canopy, which lets in wind and sun that dry everything out really fast. Then, it leaves behind a bed of flammable debris called slash and replaces that complex forest with rows of dense, uniform seedlings that just burn like matchsticks.
And this isn't just a theory from the sidelines. Listen to Professor Chris Dunn. He's a fire ecologist at Oregon State University. He says the science is pretty clear. Industrial forestry is just not an effective way to make forests more resilient to fire. In fact, he says that clearcutting directly creates more flammable landscapes.
So where does all this lead? With two sides so far apart, the fight for the forest's future is now moving into brand new arenas, and it's revealing completely different visions for how these lands could be managed in the first place.
This table really gets to the core of the philosophical divide. The federal model is all about maximum productive capacity, basically treating the forest like a commodity factory. You can contrast that with indigenous models, like the one used by the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua tribe, which focuses on long-term resilience and the health of the whole landscape, using methods like cultural burning.
And this conflict is really escalating now. It's moving into the courts, where environmental groups are suing to block specific timber sales, arguing the government is flat-out breaking federal law. And it's also moving to the ballot box, where citizens in Lane County are trying to pass a Watersheds Bill of Rights to grant legal protection to rivers, which is an attempt to override federal authority right from the ground up.
And at the end of the day, all of this boils down to one central, massive question. What is the true purpose of a public forest? Is it a resource that should be maximized for economic output? Is it a complex ecosystem that needs to be preserved at all costs? Or is it something else entirely? How Oregon answers that question is going to define the future of the Pacific Northwest for the next 100 years.